Hey, No I listeners, it's the first week in our summer series where I address a short news article or item every week, and in a couple of minutes, try to dissect what really is going on here. What's the deeper issue at the root of whatever the thing is we're talking about, and what can we know about it? So, first up this week, I want to talk about the survey that was just released by Deloitte, their 2025 survey of Gen Z and millennial workers. I'll link the whole survey and the article detailing the response in the show notes so that you can read it because there's a lot of valuable information about Gen Zs and millennials and how our generations approach work. And so you may find a lot of things to relate to, but there were three themes that stood out to me that I wanted to focus on for the next few minutes. And it actually points back to a series on work that we did a couple years ago on the Know Why podcast. So I'm going to highlight some of those episodes as well in case you'd like to go back and dive into this issue even more. But let's look at the survey. First of all, it was very broad, okay? It was the survey included 23,482 Gen Z and millennial respondents across 44 countries. So I think we can trust that the results give us a pretty good picture of what our generations are thinking and saying and doing in terms of work. Okay, so there were three things, like I mentioned, that really stuck out to me. The first was that growth at work is a priority for both millennials and Gen Z. But what is interesting is that they are specifically interested in growing in their soft skills, considering that we are now in the age of AI. So get this, 63% of Gen Zs and 65% of millennials worry that generative AI will eliminate jobs. And so they say that soft skills like communication, leadership, empathy, and networking are the most important. As you know, if you've been listening or watching, we just wrapped up our series Know About AI. And so I think it's interesting that our generation is noticing a lot of the, potential changes that generative AI will cause to our culture in the future. And they are kind of adjusting the skills that they're seeking for that. It's also kind of funny because even when I was in college, so back in like the 2010s, people were kind of criticized or, maybe questioned if they decided to pursue a degree in the humanities or a degree in the arts, classical studies. At my college, it was called the MRS degree because it was viewed, not really as something that would be easily marketable, especially in a nation coming out of a recession. People are encouraged to get jobs in the technical fields, like computer science, things like that, because they were more secure. So everybody thought in terms of being able to get a job that was in high demand and actually earn a living wage. Things are flip-flop now because all this points back to is what are humans good at and what can humans do uniquely versus what can a AI or a computer actually do for itself. And so again, those soft skills, okay, the empathy, the personal leadership, the communication, not just transmitting information, but really communicating on a deeper level, those are human tasks. And so I think it's interesting that Gen Z and millennials are really leaning into those human tasks that are going to be more needed and more unique in the world that we're heading into. So again, growth specifically with soft skills in the age of AI. Another theme that stuck out to me in this study was that Gen Z and millennials, contrary to popular belief, they are ambitious, but that doesn't mean ambitious in the way that maybe Gen X or baby boomers were ambitious. Only 6% of millennials and Gen Z say that their primary career goal is to reach a leadership position. So becoming the manager, becoming, a project leader, becoming the CEO. That's not what it's about anymore. According to the survey, it's about opportunities to thrive both on and off the job. And we'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute. The other thing that stuck out to me was the theme of identity and meaning. Now, if you've followed younger generations, millennials or Gen Z for any amount of time or read anything about them, you won't be surprised to hear that having a sense of purpose at work or a sense of meaning is really important to young adults. They really want to feel like they are making a positive impact on society with what they're doing. And what's interesting, though, is that nearly half, 41% for Gen Z and 46% for millennials, say that their primary job is actually central to their identity, their understanding of themselves, second only to friends and family. So that's another point that I do want to come back to and emphasize. But another interesting thing that I think is a positive trend is that a lot of young adults are realizing that they can find meaning even outside of work. Because another theme was there's a lot of anxiety and stress among our generations. We already know that. And a lot of that is related to financial instability. And so people are finding that they can actually get that work-life balance by sometimes getting a job maybe that pays well and has, flexible hours or reasonable expectations, but allows people more time to pursue the things that really fulfill them outside of office hours instead of combining it all into one, which again is a positive trend. So I want to take a look at these on a deeper level and really ask the question of, why are we seeing these themes? Why are we seeing themes of wanting to grow in soft skills, which I think we already addressed a little bit, especially with all of the AI series that we just did, but the ambition for a thriving life rather than just corporate success. And this conflation of identity with what we do for work, even as young adults, are partly pulling back from that, but not all the way. Well, it takes a few different things to really understand the root of these issues. And I think that we've actually covered a lot of them on the Know Why podcast in our past series, which was called Know About Thriving at Work. So another article that I will link that I actually talked about in a previous episode is based on an article that was in The Atlantic, really thorough, super interesting, and it was on the religion of workism. So in the religion of workism, success is defined by how much you work. And of course, what you do for work is core to your identity. And what the author of the article does is notice how in past generations, past centuries, the upper classes were defined by their leisure, by the lack of necessity for them to work long hours. The wealthier, more privileged you were, the less work you did, the less kind of labor you did. Well, we really flip-flopped in the modern age. The more successful you were, the more status you had was kind of defined by how many hours you spent at the office. Even though people get really burnt out really fast when they're living that way, not just in the United States, but in other countries as well, which is backed up by research cited in the article. But it actually isn't more productive. However, the more you work, the more successful you become, the more your identity is tied to that success. So the more you need to work, especially in the absence of institutions that traditionally anchored and moored us to reality where we got our sense of identity and belonging from. Things like strong community ties, religion, church attendance, other kind of traditional institutions. And so that's why the article refers to this as the religion of workism. So Gen Z is pushing back against the mindset of, being at the first one at the office and the last one to leave and being there and working as many hours as possible, and that hustle mindset in favor of a better work-life balance, which is a really good thing. Gen Z is also pushing against the idea that ambition equals climbing the corporate ladder. It's not necessarily about getting that leadership position or putting so many years in at the same company to try to get a promotion. They're defining their ambition a little bit differently. They want to thrive in a whole picture, well-rounded kind of way. And this reminds me of another article that was in the Free Press a few weeks ago, noticing how a lot of Gen Zers who had graduated college and moved to these big city metropolitan areas like New York and the West Coast were actually finding that they were having a hard time succeeding because things were so expensive that with their college debt, they couldn't actually afford to really get ahead. They couldn't afford to start a family even if they wanted to. to, and they were still stuck either in these entry level positions or trying to get into these entry level positions. So the article talks about how there are actually companies paying and incentivizing young adults to move to more rural areas in like middle America and giving them a lot of benefits to do so, where the cost of living is so much lower. So their salary goes a much longer way, and how a lot of people are taking advantage of that. And one of the things that stuck out to me in that article was one of the people interviewed actually said, it's not that my generation isn't ambitious, but we're ambitious for like a well-rounded life. Like this young couple in their 20s realized that they could, move out to Nebraska or somewhere. They could actually buy a home. They could start their family. They could be successful at work and pay off their loans, and realize that, yeah, maybe they weren't doing their dream job or what they initially envisioned themselves doing whenever they moved to LA after college, but they actually had a happier life. And so that is, for a lot of members of Gen Z and millennials too, that's the definition of thriving. That's their ambition, which is healthy. But the one aspect of this workism religion that our generation still hold on to is getting our source of identity from what we do for work, from what our primary job is. Even as we're striving for that better work-life balance, again, so many people said that's still where their identity comes from. So I want to highlight another episode that we did in our Know About Thriving at Work series, where I actually interviewed Dr. Eddie Brewer, who is a pastor, but he did his dissertation on avoiding burnout. And so he has such great wisdom and practical advice to share. And if you go back to that episode, which I will link in the show notes, he actually offers to send a free copy of his dissertation to anybody who wants to. And he includes his email address. And one of the big things that he said people need to do is find their identity outside of work. And he also said that many times people have unrealistic expectations of work. And this kind of goes back to the workism thing and even the identity. If you expect work to be the end all be all, where you're finding your source of identity, where you are finding your source of meaning and purpose, and it's also providing for all of your needs, then and you feel like you have to have your dream job so that you can be happy, then you're going to get burnt out really fast. So putting work in its proper place is, and having realistic expectations of it is key to not experiencing burnout. So that also causes us to ask, well, if our sense of identity shouldn't come from our job and shouldn't come from work, which I think if you were to ask, yourself, you would probably agree with that. But then it's like, okay, well, where does it come from? Is there a source of identity that is more stable than a job that I may lose to AI or to a recession, or that I may have to move away from for whatever reason? And the answer is yes. So I do want to address that in a moment. But before I move on, let me address one more thing that we've also covered in the past on the Know Why podcast. And this is from sociologist Arthur Brooks, who writes a lot about just how people can find success and satisfaction in life. And he talks about how when we want to find satisfaction in work, it really comes down to two things: a sense of earned success. And that is something that I think Gen Z is on the right track for, especially with their prioritization of growth at work. And even if it's with those soft skills, they want to find professional mentors. There was a whole section in the Deloitte survey about how jobs could train their managers to actually become better mentors. So I think if you see people pursue that kind of growth, then there's going to be an inherent sense of earned success that comes with that, because you're actively seeking opportunities for growth and improvement. And that's a really good thing. The other thing that makes people satisfied at work is a sense of service to others. And this again goes back to that desire that so many young adults have to have a sense of meaning and purpose at work, where they feel like they're making the world a better place. And so a lot of times people may get stuck thinking that, well, that means I have to go work for a nonprofit that's, helping refugees or bringing clean water to people in need, or, some big cause or big issue, where I have to go into some, service industry where I'm a first responder or something like that. And those are all great careers that definitely make the world a better place. But you can actually find that sense of meaning and service to others in pretty much any job. It is really about reframing the way you think. And this is what Brooks describes is realizing that you can find that sense of service in almost any job because it's about thinking about what you are doing in the sense of how is this making the world a better place, even just this small corner of the world. How am I making somebody's day better? If you are a receptionist and you make somebody's check-in smooth at the doctor's office whenever maybe they're stressed out or feeling anxious, that's a service. If you are a janitor and you are providing a clean environment for people to be able to go about their day and do whatever their job is, that is a service to others. You can look at anything you are doing in terms of how it is improving the lives of those around you, and you're going to get an inherent sense of meaning and service and purpose in that. And again, I think there's a core reason behind why we intuitively want that as human beings. So let's dive into some of that. There are some underlying truths that are being brought up here in all these things that we're talking about. So let's talk about the identity thing first. As we discussed in our AI series, we really need to understand who we are as human beings. And so, again, if you're willing to consider a Christian worldview, then the Bible tells us two things about our identity right off the bat is that we are made in God's image. So that means we're made to reflect Him, to represent Him to the world, to be His representative here on earth. But we reflect certain things about God's nature. So God is loving, He's relational, He's intelligent, He's creative. Those are all things that humans have as well because we reflect God. So we're made in God's image and we are loved by Him. And that's the foundation for anything else, for any other belief or theological, digging that you want to do. We can understand ourselves if we know that we're made in the image of God and that we are loved by Him. And that actually leads into what our purpose is as well. Again, if you are willing to look at the scriptures and consider that what they say is actually true, then the two most important commandments, according to Jesus, summing up basically all of the commandments in the Bible, really boil down to love God and love others. So we respond to God loving us by loving Him. And then we represent Him to the world by loving other people. And that actually gives us action items too, because as we know, if you really love someone or something, then you act on their behalf, right? That's an action. It's not just a feeling. And so when we are loving God and we're loving other people, that gives us that sense of purpose and meaning inherent in everything that we're doing, regardless of what our title might be. And it also reveals why we have that desire to do something that is meaningful. But so often I think we get caught up in this twist or lie that in order for it to be meaningful, it has to have a certain title or a certain salary, or it has to be perceived a certain way by the rest of the world. But if internally we realize that everything we do is actually impacting the world in either a positive or a negative way, we can find meaning inherent in whatever we're doing. So it's not an accident that whenever we find that purpose at work, that sense of making the world a better place, we're happy because that's us living out our core identity as human beings in a really practical way. I also want to mention briefly, too, that work isn't a bad thing. And this is another thing where you may not think that you think this, but it underpins so much of the way that we talk about work and think about work. And so as we discussed in our series on work that we did a couple years ago, there's this saying, find something that you love to do and then you'll never work a day in your life. Or like find your passion and figure out a way to make money doing it. And the underlying assumption there is that we have to make work not feel like work. But again, if you go back to Genesis and you consider that the Bible is true, God created Adam and Eve to work together to take care of creation while the world was still perfect, before there was sin, before there was pain, before there was death, before there was betrayal. And work wasn't a curse. Work is already something that human beings were supposed to be doing. And so, again, work is a good thing. It's supposed to fulfill us. And if we realize that, and we also realize that work encompasses so much more than just what brings us a paycheck, I think we can relieve some of that pressure of, again, that unrealistic expectation that Dr. Brewer was talking about of having that ideal job that gives you your sense of identity, that also feels fun, that also happens to pay the bills that you need to pay, and that's just a lot of expectation to put on one job. And if your life has turned out that way, well, then good for you. Like, that's great. But for a lot of people, and as a lot of Gen Zs and millennials are realizing, life doesn't work out that way. Sometimes you have to figure out, okay, what job can I take that's going to kind of be in that Venn diagram, right? Of the salary that I need, the best work-life balance that I can get to give me enough time to do other things that are important to me too. And so if you spend, if you find a job that you're good at and that you can find that sense of meaning in, even if it's not your dream job or your perfect job, and you can, do that job to pay your bills, but then have enough time after working hours to do things you're passionate about, like create or volunteer for a cause that you're passionate about. Those things count as work. And those things are valuable, and those things are making a difference in society, whether or not you're getting paid for them. Our culture really prioritizes or oftentimes only acknowledges work that brings in a paycheck. And that's just not an accurate way to understand the multiple ways that human beings contribute to society and contribute to the world and take care of it and take care of each other. So I think it's important to have a healthy understanding of work, understand that work itself isn't bad, and that work also isn't defined by a paycheck. And there are a lot of ways to contribute to the world in a positive way and make an impact and also find meaning and fulfillment. But underpinning all of it has to be a proper understanding of who we are as humans, where we get our identity from, and what we were actually created to do. There are a lot of ways to live that purpose out, but we have to understand that purpose. So, I think, again, just to wrap everything up, that this study is super interesting because I'm really optimistic. I think it shows that Gen Zs and millennials are realizing a lot of these truths about work and are actively pursuing a healthier balance, a healthier understanding, and a more well-rounded life because they want to thrive. And so my addition to that would be everything that we've said here is that there is a reason why people are pulled toward that. There's a reason people are rejecting workism. It's not actually fulfilling to find your identity at work and to let everything else in your life, be sacrificed. People are finding out that they want to feel like they're serving others. They want to feel like they are making a difference. People want to have a healthy sense of identity. And that's one of the biggest problems and confusions today, I think. But if we know our sense of identity, and that also gives us a clue to what we're supposed to be doing. And then when we let go of certain kind of modern cultural lies about work being bad and only valuable if we're getting paid for it, then we can kind of let go of a lot of those unrealistic expectations and be more free to pursue a life that maybe doesn't look like success by, standards of 30 years ago or 40 years ago, but gives us the life that we want to have, the life where we can really flourish as human beings. And that's the life that God wants for us too. So that is my recommendation for today. Check out the show notes so you can read the articles that I've mentioned, as well as go back and listen to that series we did on work if you're interested. And I'll talk to you next week on the Know Why podcast.